Robert Warren, age 32, is looking for a place to sleep. It's late, his university classes have run longer than expected, and two friends, Joseph Price and Victor Zaborski, agree to host him. Robert arrives at their home at 10:30 p.m. and enters the house. Then there is a blackout. 1 hour later, at 11:49 p.m., Victor Zaborski calls 911. He has just discovered Robert lying in bed with several wounds to his torso, dead. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. Investigators will discover that there were a total of 4 people in the house that night. So who was lying? Who could have wanted Robert dead enough to stab him in his own room? This is certainly one of the most frustrating and one of the most mysterious cases ever. Our story takes us to the United States of America, more precisely to Washington, D.C., the capital. At the time of the events, it is August 2nd, 2006, and there is a stifling heat over the city. It's summer, but America being a modern country, they are of course equipped with air conditioning, so no problem on that side. At the beginning of August, Robert Warren is struggling a bit. Since the end of June, he has been working as legal counsel for an organization in Washington, D.C., Radio Free Asia, whose goal is to inform Asian American populations about what is happening in Asian countries. At the same time, Robert is also taking university courses, even though he already has a law degree, to continue specializing. And on this August 2nd, he has too much work. He stays longer than expected at the university and decides not to return home to Virginia, 300 kilometers from Washington. Normally he takes the train, but by the time he gets home, eats, showers, and goes to bed. It will be too late. His night would be far too short. So Robert starts calling friends to see if someone can host him. But each time, most of them have a good reason to refuse. Either they don't have space, they have dinner plans, they're not home. Some have children. Robert is 32. He's at that stage of life. He then tries one last call by contacting Joseph Price, one of his old high school friends who moved to Washington. He has a small townhouse, several rooms. Whatever the situation, he won't refuse him. And that is exactly what happens. Joseph Price therefore agrees to host Robert at his house at 1509 Swan Street, a nice small gray townhouse where he lives with his partner Victor Zaborski. Joseph and Victor are somewhat known locally. They advocate for gay rights and have already written articles for local newspapers. But we will learn more about who they are during the investigation. At 9:30 p.m., Robert Wan calls his wife Catherine to tell her that, given the time, he will not return to Virginia that night and will stay at Joseph's. At 10:24 p.m., Robert calls Joseph to say he is on his way. At 10:32 p.m., he is in front of 1509 Swan Street. Joseph opens the door, Robert enters, and then there is a blackout. What happens in the hour following Robert's arrival is a mystery that will captivate America. At 11:49 p.m., 911 receives a call with Victor on the line, Joseph's partner. Arriving quickly at the scene, the first paramedics are greeted by Victor, who is wearing pajamas and appears freshly showered. Upstairs, emergency responders discover a strange scene. Robert is lying in his bed. On his back, on a soft pillow, the bed is neatly made. The room is tidy. There's even very little blood that has flowed to the side, almost as if cleaning had been done. Even stranger, Robert has 3 knife wounds on the right side of his body. One pierced his heart, but the wounds are clean. That is to say, Robert has no defensive injuries, so the killer simply drove the knife cleanly into his body. And that is what killed him. Yet it doesn't make sense because when you stab someone who is sleeping, they will inevitably wake up in panic, try to protect where it hurts. They move around, you stab the mattress, blood sprays everywhere. But here, none of that is present. The mattress is almost like new. The bed is made, everything looks staged, as if Robert did not die in that bed and was placed there afterward. The paramedics go even further, noting in their report that Robert appears to have been showered before being placed on the bed. While waiting for the autopsy to learn more about the exact causes of death, a team of investigators arrives on site, alerted by the paramedics to the strange scene they have just discovered. And at 1509 Swan Street, the atmosphere is strange at that moment. Normally, when you discover your friend dead in bed, stabbed, it's not exactly cheerful, but here investigators have the impression that, among everyone present in the house, no one is telling the truth. In the house are Joseph and Victor, but also Dylan Ward, a third man who sometimes sleeps with the couple, and who is present that night. It is consensual. The three men have relationships together, everyone is fine with it. Especially since Dylan Ward, at that time, is studying massage therapy to learn how to relieve people through professional massages. When they arrive, the first officers quickly notice that the three men are talking quietly in a corner of the living room, so they won't be heard, as if they are agreeing on something. The three men are questioned and all say the same thing. When Robert arrives, Joseph welcomes him and shows him his room. That night, Robert is tired and does not intend to stay up late, so he goes to bed very quickly after briefly drinking a glass of water with Joseph, Victor, and Dylan. The evening therefore continues without Robert, who is in his room, except that around 11:40 p.m., Joseph, Victor, and Dylan hear the chime of the back door that opens onto a small courtyard. At the back of the house, there is an entrance leading to a very small street. It is this entrance that has a small chime that rings when someone passes through. At that moment, around 11:40 p.m., Joseph, Victor, and Dylan decide to ignore the chime because, as I forgot to mention, the couple rents their basement as a room to a woman named Sarah, who is not very important to our case. That night she's absent and saw and heard nothing. But at that moment, Joseph and Victor think it is her coming in through the back of the house, so it does not alarm them. However, in the minutes following the sound of the chime, the three men hear a half-muffled scream coming from Robert's room. Joseph and Victor rush upstairs and discover Robert lying on his back in bed. Joseph does not immediately see the wounds on the right side of Robert's torso. He tries to wake him by speaking to him, does not understand why Robert does not respond, decides to go around the bed, lifts Robert's t-shirt and sees the blood that has flowed onto it. Their friend has been stabbed. Victor grabs the phone and dials 911, as mentioned at the beginning. Joseph also says he found a bloodied knife in the room, which came from their kitchen. If we summarize the first scenario based on the layout of the house, here is what it suggests. The killer would have entered through the back of the house via the small street, crossed the patio, then opened the glass door leading to the kitchen without anyone noticing. Once in the kitchen, the killer takes a knife, then heads toward the staircase to go upstairs. The staircase, notably, is right next to the living room, where Joseph, Victor, and Dylan were spending their evening. The killer would therefore have passed right next to them, still without being noticed. He goes up the stairs, then heads to Robert's room, who at that moment is watching television but is likely falling asleep. The killer opens the bedroom door, approaches him quietly, then stabs him without Robert reacting much, since no defensive injuries are found on his arms. He lets out only a small cry. How does the killer leave afterward? No idea, because after hearing Robert's cry, the three men rush to his room, so they necessarily pass through the stairs. Perhaps the killer jumped out of a window. On top of that, none of Robert's belongings are missing. His 2 wallets with cash are still there. His watch, his phone, his computer. The scenario does not hold, so Joseph, seeing investigators questioning the crime scene out loud, saying it is strange, there is no blood, no defensive wounds, it looks like the room was cleaned or that Robert did not die here, goes to them and explains, somewhat embarrassed, that he was mistaken. The first scenario is not the right one. He does not know why, but in the panic, he said anything. Robert was not first discovered dead in his room. In fact, he explains that Robert was found outside in the small courtyard at the back of the house. That is where the cry was heard. The men went outside, found him unconscious, and decided to bring him back into his room. There, they saw he was dead and decided to call for help. So if Robert did go outside that night to get some air, it would mean that someone appeared out of nowhere, armed with a knife, attacked him, struck his torso. Once again, Robert does not defend himself, since no defensive marks are found on his arms, collapses to the ground with a small cry. Then his friends arrive and carry him back to his room. The problem is the patio. If Robert was attacked there with 3 open wounds to the torso, there should be a pool of blood. But there is nothing, not a single drop. Even more, what can be seen is a garden hose, which may suggest that the scene was cleaned. At this point, the case becomes unclear. There are 2 scenarios in which each crime scene appears to have been cleaned. While waiting for Robert's autopsy, investigators look into his life and that of his friends. Robert Eric Wan was born on June 1st, 1974, in the United States and grew up in Brooklyn, near New York. Of Chinese origin, his family fled communism. Robert quickly developed an interest in Asian history and did not deny his origins, even though he knew he was fortunate to be born in the United States, a country of freedom that gave him every chance to succeed. From a young age, Robert was fascinated by America. At Halloween, for example, he dressed as a Minuteman, an American soldier during the War of Independence who had to be ready to go into battle at a minute's notice. Robert attended the best schools. He first went to a Catholic boys' school, a Xaverian high school, then to William and Mary. He began his university studies in 1992, where he met Joseph. Both were brilliant students who joined a private student association organizing campus events. They progressed easily in their studies, graduated in law, and became lawyers. In 2000, Robert moved to Washington, D.C. to become a lawyer specializing in commercial real estate law. His life was stable. He was a model graduate with a good job. He met his future wife, Catherine Helene Yu, at a law conference in 2002. They married the following year and settled in Virginia. 3 years of happiness passed, and in June 2006, Robert obtained a new position as general counsel at Radio Free Asia. Each day he traveled from Virginia to Washington, but felt more fulfilled than in real estate law. At the same time, Joseph and Victor settled together at 1509 Swan Street. Joseph specialized in intellectual property law, while Victor worked in marketing. They also regularly had relationships with Dylan Ward, who sometimes stayed with them for several weeks. So nothing particularly stands out, whether in Robert's life or in that of Joseph, Victor, and Dylan. Returning to the night of August 2nd, Robert sends 2 emails, one to his wife Catherine, telling her he has arrived safely and that she will call him the next morning, and another to a colleague confirming a lunch the next day. Meanwhile, the autopsy report changes the course of the investigation completely. It clearly states that Robert Won did not die from the stab wounds. When investigators read the report, they immediately understand that something happened behind closed doors in that house, and that no one wants to tell the truth. First, the knife found at the scene does not match the wounds on Robert's body. There are no fibers, no hair, no tissue belonging to Robert on the blade. Moreover, the size does not match. Even though there is blood on the knife, it appears to have been applied artificially. However, one knife is missing from the kitchen set, and the couple cannot say where it is. The autopsy also reveals puncture marks consistent with blood extraction. In addition, there are signs of strangulation, blood vessels in his eyes burst under pressure, and there are marks on his neck. Seminal fluid belonging to Robert is also found near his groin, which can be released at death or during sexual activity. All these elements suggest a BDSM scenario that went wrong. There is strangulation, blood extraction, and the presence of seminal fluid. Investigators also find adult toys and catheters used for blood extraction in the house, as well as books about electricity used for pain and pleasure. Faced with these questions, Joseph, Victor, and Dylan decide to remain silent and request a lawyer. The most likely scenario, according to investigators, is as follows. That night, alcohol and drugs are consumed. The mixture quickly affects Robert. Under the influence, Joseph proposes trying something, a practice they regularly engage in. They extract blood to induce a trance-like state. Whether Robert agreed or was already impaired is unknown. Joseph inserts a needle, and the situation changes completely. The 3 men become increasingly excited. They extract Robert's blood and use a machine later found in the house, cleaned, a device designed to electrically stimulate a man regardless of his state of consciousness. They stimulate Robert with the machine. One of them strangles him, believing he is experiencing pleasure as his spasms become more frequent. But Robert is no longer conscious. He has lost too much blood due to the catheter connected to his arm. When the euphoria fades, they realize he is no longer breathing. His heart has stopped. They immediately move him to his room. While Victor and Dylan clean the scene, Joseph attempts to revive him, but fails. The 3 men then agree. Not a word about what has just happened. There are no witnesses, they can get away with it, they need a plan. The intruder scenario is created in haste. As seen, it does not hold, but it is the best they can come up with. Joseph then approaches his friend and stabs him 3 times with a knife from the kitchen, in the heart, liver, and lung. He disposes of the weapon, then stages the scene. He takes another knife, smears it with Robert's blood, and places it in the room. The knife found is not the murder weapon. They continue cleaning the room but go too far. There is not enough blood, everything is too clean. The sheets are properly arranged, it looks staged. Investigators also note that dogs later react to the washing machine, suggesting that bloodied items may have been cleaned there, although no detailed analysis is conducted. In October and November 2008, Joseph, Victor, and Dylan are charged with obstruction of justice. On December 19th, they are also charged with conspiracy. The trial begins in June 2010, presided over by Judge Lynn Lebovitz of the Superior Court of Washington. The case is presented in full. On June 29th, the judge delivers her verdict. Despite numerous suspicious elements and inconsistencies, she concludes that the government failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendants obstructed justice or conspired to do so. In clear terms, Joseph, Victor, and Dylan are found not guilty. Reasonable doubt remains. She suggests they likely know more than they have said, possibly even the truth about Robert's death, but the evidence is insufficient to prove it. After the trial, a settlement is reached with Robert's wife, Catherine. The terms are not made public. Joseph and Dylan later change their names. Joseph continues working as a lawyer, Dylan becomes a professional massage therapist, and Victor remains in marketing. The couple sells the house after renovating it and moves to Miami. Despite numerous theories, Robert Wan's death remains a mystery. Why was there no struggle? Why did he not defend himself? Why was the scene cleaned, and by whom? If it was simply a scenario that went wrong, why not admit it? The United States is not known for imposing heavy sentences for unintentional killings in such contexts. Authorities and Robert's family believe the three men are hiding a secret and have agreed to take it with them to the grave. The murder weapon has never been found, nor the missing knife from the house. If you watched until the end, I won't ask you to leave a specific comment, but tell me whether you agree with the scenario of a situation that went wrong, or if you think someone could have entered the house, stabbed Robert, and left. It may be interesting to read the comments because the case remains mysterious to this day. A third version was also given later by the three men, claiming they were in their room with the door closed when they heard the scream, and only then went to Robert's room. This contradicts the earlier scenarios. August 1982. Karen and Janet Johnson are on vacation with their family in a Canadian natural park. Suddenly, gunshots break out in the middle of the night while the rest of the family is gathered around a fire. The girls hear screams and then nothing. All they notice is that a man seems to be approaching their aunt. That night, Karen and Janet vanish. For a long time, Canadian authorities believe they were shot at the same time as the rest of their family, especially after the grim discovery that will be made the following month. Our story takes place in Western Canada in British Columbia, a province that carries considerable weight in the country of maple syrup, as it is the third most populated province in Canada with 5.2 million inhabitants. In British Columbia, you can find Wells Grey Provincial Park, a magnificent park filled with waterfalls, lakes, forests, and mountains. A perfect place to recharge during the summer. Naturally, the Johnson family decided to spend their vacation there. A wonderful idea. At the time of the events, the Johnson family consisted of 6 people. There was Bob, 44 years old, married to Jackie, 41, with whom he had 2 daughters, Janet, 13, and Karen, 11. The Johnsons loved camping and nature. That passion came from the grandparents, who were also joining them for this vacation with their brand new motorhome. George, 66, and Edith, 59. Both were retired and loved spending time with their 2 granddaughters. They had suggested organizing a full week at Wells Grey Park. Their motorhome could accommodate 4 adults, so it was perfect. Janet and Karen would sleep in a tent. The park covers 5,415 square kilometers, so it's enormous. And over the course of a week of vacation, you never see the same landscapes twice. Although for this family, the landscape they were about to see would mainly be that of a disturbed man arriving in the middle of nowhere with a rifle, firing in every direction before locking them inside a cabin. But we're not there yet. On Monday, August 11th, 1982, the Johnson family sets off. Bob and Jackie, Janet and Karen take their places in the family car, a Plymouth Caravelle, to meet the grandparents, who are waiting beside their motorhome near the park entrance. Their plan is to head to a remote area called Phage Creek, about 18 kilometers south of the entrance to Wells Grey, so they won't be disturbed by the tourists who fill the park at that time of year. The family enters the park. Then they vanish. No trace at all. No phone call, no postcard, nothing for 12 full days, until August 23rd, when Bob is supposed to return to work at the factory. His boss, Mr. Bonner, contacts the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to report the worrying disappearance of his employee, and more importantly, his entire family, since no one has seen the Johnsons since they left for Wells Gray Park. Bob had never disappeared like this without a reason. In 20 years, he had never even taken a sick day. Fortunately, Canadian authorities immediately take the case seriously. They discover that the last time the family had contacted their relatives was on August 6th. Since then, nothing. So what could have happened to the 6 members of the family for them to suddenly cut off all contact with the outside world? A massive search is organized in the park. 4 adults and 2 teenagers with a car and a motorhome cannot simply disappear. Yet for several weeks, nothing is found. Investigators even question a gas station attendant who says he saw the family filling up before entering the park. Everyone seemed fine. There appeared to be no tension within the family. The girls were very happy to join their grandparents for the vacation. At the time, there were no mobile phones, so it was impossible to locate anyone. And the park is enormous. If the entire family had fallen into a ravine or an abandoned mine, it could take a long time to find them. Then, on September 13th, a hiker named Kurt Crack contacts authorities. While searching for mushrooms in the park, he came across a burned-out car. The vehicle is a Plymouth Caravelle, the same model driven by the Johnson family. It is formally identified once the license plate is checked. Investigators immediately go to the site with Sergeant Mike Eastham. The Johnson's car is completely burned. The windows exploded from the heat. The door handles and all 4 tires have melted. Only the shell remains, along with the roof racks that had held the family's luggage. But as investigators move closer, they discover something horrifying. The car had not simply been set on fire in the forest. It had been burned with people inside. Some bones are found on the back seat, not many according to the first reports. The order is given to open the trunk with a crowbar. Officers approach, pry it open, and step back immediately. Inside is a pile of charred bones, including 2 small skulls. Investigators immediately think of Karen and Janet. Sergeant Eastham will later say, "The sight we had to face was indescribable. 2 small skeletons are what remained of them. Those 2 small skulls seem to stare at us with hollow eyes. One of them appears to have a gunshot wound above one of the eye sockets." The first hypothesis for investigators is that the remains of the entire Johnson family are inside the vehicle. The father, the mother, and the 2 daughters. But where are the grandparents? At first, George becomes the main suspect. Did the grandfather lose control? Some even wonder whether he might have been caught abusing one of the girls and shot the others to silence them. However, the first analyses soon show otherwise. There are 6 different DNA profiles. 6 bodies. 6 skulls, identified through dental records. Some bones are missing, particularly from the bodies that had been placed on the back seat, likely taken by animals. The investigation for a worrying disappearance becomes a sextuple homicide. 10 days after the horrific discovery, a funeral ceremony is held for the family. It is filmed in case the killer attends. Investigators know that some murderers return to the funerals of their victims. Nothing comes of it. With the discovery of the bodies and the bullet-damaged skulls, investigators begin forming a first scenario. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police believe the motive was sexual and connected to Karen and Janet. At the start of their vacation, the Johnson family had chosen an isolated camping area, far from tourists. According to investigators, during the first 2 nights they may have felt watched, especially in the evenings, branches cracking, bushes moving. Jackie felt uneasy, and she had reason to. A predator had spotted them, particularly Janet and Karen. One evening, while the adults are sitting around the campfire, the attacker decides to act. He likely lives near the park and knows the area well. Armed with a rifle, he waits for nightfall before approaching. He comes out from the bushes and moves slowly toward the 4 adults. Janet and Karen have already gone to sleep in their tent. That is why he attacks at that moment. He knows they are trapped. By the time he finishes with the adults, the girls will not have time to escape. He watches their reactions carefully as he approaches. Then he stops, aims, and without saying a word, fires. Bob, Jackie, George, and Edith are killed instantly. None of them can defend themselves. The gunshots freeze them in place. Only one scream echoes through the forest. No one hears it. After the massacre, the attacker approaches the tent where Janet and Karen are trapped. What happens next will only become clear much later. What investigators know is that after the killings, the bodies are loaded into Bob Johnson's vehicle, one by one. The rest will take time to uncover. When was the car burned? It is discovered more than a month after the family left for vacation. What ordeal did Janet and Karen endure? If the motive was sexual, they may have been kept alive for weeks, but where? The investigation by Canadian authorities will later face strong criticism. Investigators focus primarily on finding the grandparents' motorhome, which has still not been discovered. They are convinced the killer stole it and that finding it will lead to the culprit. Search efforts in the park gradually decrease. The investigation shifts toward a search for the stolen motorhome. Posters are placed everywhere, in stores, on roadside boards. A replica of the grandparents' motorhome is even built and displayed across the country. Television broadcasts speculate about a possible road trip the killer might have taken with the vehicle. Witness reports begin to arrive. One, located 12 hours away in the province of Saskatchewan, is taken seriously. The witness claims to have seen the motorhome with two men inside. Both are described as being in their 20s, poorly dressed, with long hair and speaking French. One is blonde, the other has dark hair. Composite sketches are distributed nationwide. Then in October 1983, more than a year after the murders, a forest ranger living deep inside the park hears that authorities are searching for a motorhome. He contacts them. "I know where it is," he says. "It's up on a small mountain in the middle of the park, and it's burned." The grandparents' motorhome had never been stolen. It had also been burned in the park, less than 30 kilometers from where the Johnson family car had been found. The investigation begins again from the start. But a new element appears. The forest road where the motorhome was abandoned is extremely remote. No tourist ever goes there. Whoever committed the massacre must live in the region and know the park well. Investigators focus on the small towns and villages surrounding Wells Gray Park, places that rarely have more than 1,000 inhabitants. If someone had behaved strangely during the past year, it would likely be noticed, and eventually, something does emerge. During their investigation in the surrounding communities, Canadian authorities, including Sergeant Eastham, learned from a woman living near the massacre site that a man named David Shearing had tried the previous year to change the license plate of a Ford motorhome. He also wanted to repair or conceal a bullet impact on the door. Before moving directly against David, Sergeant Eastham decides to learn more about him. David Shearing is 24 years old. He spent most of his life on his father William's cattle farm. William had 3 children, though the others are not relevant here. David was considered a gifted student, especially good at mathematics and mechanics. He had few friends growing up. One of the rare testimonies about him comes from Marvin Tremblay, who says David did not participate much in school activities. He occasionally attended school dances or went to the drive-in cinema. He liked drinking beer, but had never caused trouble when drinking with friends. Overall, David was not seen as a troublemaker. He graduated in 1977 and later worked various small jobs, continuing with mechanical work. His life changed after the death of his father, who suffered a heart attack. Losing his father meant losing his closest support. David left the family farm and found work in Tumbler Ridge, a new Canadian town under construction at the time. Workers were needed and David was hired, but he began stealing construction materials to build himself a cabin outside the town. He soon fell in with the wrong crowd. His first arrest came in September 1983, a year after the massacre, when he was stopped at night with accomplices in a truck full of stolen tools from a construction site. Since that arrest, David had been required to report weekly to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Office. At the time of the massacre the previous year, he had been living in a large rented house near Wells Gray Park, located between the crime scenes and the locations where the burned vehicles were found. He appeared to be a very strong suspect. On November 19th, 1983, David Shearing is summoned for questioning by Sergeant Eastham. During the interrogation, the sergeant first brings up an unrelated case, a man named Carter who had been struck and killed by a vehicle near Wells Gray Park in 1980. David suddenly admits he was responsible for the accident and fled the scene after panicking. He is immediately placed under arrest. Then Sergeant Eastham asked him about the Johnson family murders. David answers that they were shot near the old Bear Creek campsite. It is a critical mistake. That information had never been made public. Realizing what he has revealed, David begins to cry. Under pressure, he confesses. He explains that one night in August 1982, he noticed the family's car and motorhome parked in an area rarely used by travelers. Curious, he approached the camp during the night and watched the family from behind bushes. Later, he returned with a rifle. He waited until the girls went to their tent and then opened fire on the 4 adults around the fire. After killing them, he approached the tent and shot the 2 girls as well. He then placed all 6 bodies in the car. The adults were placed on the back seat and the girls in the trunk. After stealing some belongings, he hid the car in the forest, returned the next day with gasoline, drove it to another location, and set it on fire with the bodies inside. He later burned the motorhome as well. David initially pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, claiming the killings occurred during a robbery that went wrong. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. However, Sergeant Eastham remained convinced the real motive had not been revealed. After the conviction, he visited David again and suggested that investigators already knew what he had done to Janet and Karen, and that telling the truth would matter for any future parole request. The claim was a bluff. Investigators had no such evidence. But David decided to speak. He admitted that since the age of 15, he had experienced violent sexual fantasies. When he saw Janet and Karen at the campsite, he became obsessed. The killings had not been about theft. After murdering the adults, he had deceived the girls, telling them something terrible had happened and that they needed to stay quiet. He took them to an abandoned fishing cabin in the forest, where he kept them for several days. Eventually, he moved them to his farm, where the abuse continued until the end of August. Realizing he could not keep them alive much longer, he took them one at a time into the forest and shot them. Only afterward did he burn the family car. Today, David Shearing changed his surname to Ennis in prison. He applied for parole in 2008, but the board determined he still posed a danger because of his violent sexual fantasies. In 2021, his parole request was again denied. He remains incarcerated. The relatives of Bob, Jackie, Janet, Karen, George, and Edith know that one day David may be released because of age or illness, but they hope he dies in prison. One cousin of the family said, "His death is the only way to move forward." No one will ever know exactly what Janet and Karen endured during the final days of their short lives. What is certain is that they experienced something unimaginable